Tyler didn't answer. His face was pale, his hands actually locked on the burden despite the fact that the motors had been closed down. Maybe giving up of the controls would finish what he definitely realized his vocation was over. They will need to converse with you. Ethan squeezed tenderly. You want to? Don't let me know what I want to do, Tyler yapped, his voice breaking as he turned strongly toward Ethan. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breathing whimsical. You figure I don't have the foggiest idea what's going on with this. That lady, she arranged this. She's been teasing me from the second she stepped on this plane. Ethan grimaced, skepticism moving quickly over his face. Sir, you did this to yourself. She didn't let out the slightest peep to you, and you shut up. Tyler spat, his hand throwing down on the armrest. She is simply some rich. He halted himself, the word hanging implicit toxin reviling on his tongue. His head dropped, eyes flicking to the ground as he breathed out forcefully. The sharp thump on the cockpit entryway took the two-man leap. Ethan turned around the entryway like it could burst open. Sir, they're here. Tyler didn't move. Briefly the two men sat peacefully, the thump sounding again, stronger this time, more persistent. At last Tyler stood. The developments were firm, as though his body resupposed each step. He fixed his rumpled coat and smoothed a hand through his soggy hair, constraining himself to inhale. They won't fire me, he murmured softly as though attempting to persuade himself. I've been hair too lengthy. They need me. Ethan didn't contend. He essentially looked as Tyler opened the cockpit entryway and pushed it open. When Tyler ventured into the lodge, Lena was at that point, standing, her stance impeccably ready, as though the whole trial had been only a minor bother. Her look cleared over him as he moved toward his developments, vacillating somewhat under her calm investigation. Mrs. Carter, Tyler said, compelling the tight grin that looked more like a grimace. We've landed securely. I trust everything was agreeable to you. Lena's forehead angled somewhat at the endeavor at mutual respect, her demeanor staying cool and unbothered. She didn't answer promptly. All things considered, she looked toward the lodge entryway where shadows flashed against the off-white glass as David Carter's group drew near. I'll allow my significant other to conclude, Lena said delicately. The words basic and estimated hit Tyler like a punch to the stomach. Any transitory expectation he'd had broken into pieces. The lodge entryway opened and in ventured David Carter. David Carter was a man whose presence could quietness a room before he talked. Tall, expansive bore. What's more, wearing an impeccably customized charcoal suit, he moved with the certainty of somebody who won't ever need to speak more loudly to deserve admiration. The ones who followed him security helped. Furthermore, senior leaders stood by quietly, their appearances incoherent yet sharp. Lena, David said first, his voice warm as he strode toward his better half. He kissed her cheek tenderly prior to venturing back, his dull look glimmering toward Tyler's throat. When dry, David checked out him with a sort of calm power that caused Tyler to feel like he was being taken apart on the spot. He didn't have to speak loudly. The power was in his quietness and the manner in which his look held. Tyler set up Chief Matthews, David said finally, his tone quiet however purposeful. Would you want to make sense of your conduct on this flight? Tyler flickered, his mouth opening furthermore, shutting pointlessly. Briefly, sir, I don't have any idea everything you've been said yet. There's been a misconception. David's temple lifted somewhat. A misconception? Yes, Tyler said rapidly, a glimmer of distress in his voice. All in all, nothing remains to be made sense of. The flight was smooth and there were no bad things to say. I've done nothing out of sorts. Lena's delicate voice sliced through the room like a razor. Nothing out of sorts. Tyler turned forcefully toward her, his demeanor winding as he battled to hold his disintegrating poise. Mrs. Carter, with all due regard. No, David contributed briskly, his look limiting. You won't address my better half? Tyler froze, the words hitting him like a slap. David made a stride nearer, his voice quiet however tenacious. My group has proactively gotten a full report, Chief Observer. Explanations from the team lodge sound records. Your conduct on this flight was amateurish, inadmissible, and honestly humiliating. Tyler's face became red as his head shook in dismay. You can't. You're done, David said, his tone last. You will at this point not fly for this organization or any auxiliary under my name. I recommend you pack your things and leave this airplane quickly. My group will guarantee you are accompanied from the premises. The quiet in the lodge was outright. Tyler gazed at David, then at Lena, like looking for some last opportunity to argue his case, yet there was nothing. Lena stood quiet despite everything, her look holding him like a mirror to his own disgrace. Briefly, Tyler's chest hurled as though he could yell or dissent in any case. The words never came. He took a gander at the countenances around him. Dana, David's group, Ethan actually waiting at the cockpit entryway, and acknowledged there was nobody left to protect him. He had done this to himself. Tyler advanced toward the lodge entryway, his mien weighty and slow like his body opposed each movement. Two colleagues him without a word, directing him down the steps and onto the landing area where the dark SUVs held up from the window. Dana looked as Tyler vanished into the dim. She let out a breath. She hadn't understood she'd been holding it over. Lena got her jacket from her seat, hanging it carefully over her arm. It's been over starting from the starting. David went to his significant other with a little grin, his demeanor mellowing. Will we go? Lena gestured, slipping her hand delicately into his offered arm. Together they left the stream, leaving the memory of Tyler Matthews and his destruction far behind, and very much appreciate that the one who thought he held all the power took in the hardest illustration of his life. Never misjudge the tranquil ones in light of the fact that their quietness frequently holds the most intense results. If you partook in this story and need to hear more stories of equity, karma, and unforeseen turns, remember to like, offer, and in particular buy into the feed. Hit that warning ringer so you never miss a story. Gratitude for watching, and I'll see you in the following one. They conveyed an edge that hushed further conversation. Lena had learned quite a while in the past that tolerance was her most noteworthy weapon. Individuals misjudged her since she didn't take on each conflict that introduced itself, be that as it may. When the second came, when she decided to act, it was dependably, with accuracy and influence. Still, Dana couldn't conceal her anxiety. You shouldn't need to manage this, she mumbled. Lena's grin remained faint, yet her eyes relaxed as she turned around to the window. I've managed far more awful, my dear. This is simply commotion in the cockpit. Tyler looked at the lodge camera feed, a little screen showing the travelers situated behind him. He scoffed as Lena showed up on the screen, made quiet and totally uninformed to him of her place. She assumes she claims the world, he mumbled to his co-pilot, a more youthful man named Ethan who sat discreetly close to him. Ethan moved awkwardly in his seat. Sir, I don't think I know precisely exact thing I'm discussing, Tyler snapped, removing him. I've been flying these planes for years, Ethan. You figure I don't understand what's going on? This occupation used to mean something. It was for individuals who acquired it. Currently it's all very rich people and arm candy spouses marching around like they have a place here. Ethan turned away, obviously differing, yet too threatened to even think about talking up. Tyler's pomposity filled the cockpit like flat air, suffocating and weighty. What might be said about her significant other? Ethan wondered carefully, ending the quiet. Isn't she hitched to somebody significant? Tyler sneered. Presumably some person who acquired his daddy's fortune. That is the manner by which these individuals get by. They wed and to cash streak it around and act like they procured a seat on this stream. He shook his head with a deigning chuckle, uninformed about the incongruity of his words. What Tyler couldn't understand, what he would not see, was the truth of the lady sitting unobtrusively in the lodge. Lena Carter was not only the spouse of somebody strong, she was strong by her own doing. The realm she and her significant other had constructed was a demonstration of their diligent effort, discipline, and vision. Yet men like Tyler seldom looked past their presumptions. Back in the lodge, Lena put her glass down on the cleaned table before her, the precious stone ringing delicately against its surface. She turned her consideration back to Dana, who had at long last quit squirming, her own tablet currently inactive in her lap. Dana, Lena said delicately, her voice breaking the calm. Do you recollect everything I said to you when you began working with me? Dana gazed upward, flickering in shock. Yes, you said to continuously pay attention to my gut feelings, yet never let any other individual clatter me. Lena's grin augmented somewhat. Precisely, you can't control how individuals act, yet you can constantly control how you answer. That is where genuine power lies. As Lena's words waited in the air, the stream proceeded with its consistent trip, slicing through the mists like a blade through silk. Outside, the world fell away into an ocean of murkiness, the lodge lit simply by the delicate shine of elevated lights. Unbeknown to Tyler, the rope he was so thoughtlessly winding around himself was fixing with each second that passed. For the present, Lena held up beating her experience as consistently in light of the fact that individuals like Skipper Tyler continuously uncovered their genuine nature, and when they did, they never acknowledged how quickly the world could betray them. The personal luxury plane took off consistently over the mists. The world beneath decreased to a breadth of haziness interspersed by faint flickers of far-off city lights. The lodge quieted and covered in extravagance felt like a completely different. The delicate murmur of the motors wrapped Lena as she sat unobtrusively in her seat, her look fixed on the window as though the scene past offered her some confidential comfort. It was not whenever she first had flown like this, enveloped by quiet power and style, yet something about this specific excursion felt different. It wasn't the actual flight nor the objective, it was the man in the cockpit, a man whose pomposity putrefied like a concealed injury, becoming uglier by the moment. In the cockpit, Chief Tyler Matthews sat unbending, his eyes gleaming between the instrument board. Also, the weak sparkle of the launch camera feed on the screen. Lena stood by, created unshaken. Everything she might do apparently ponder her quiet presence, a direct attack against him in manners he couldn't completely verbalize. Tyler had consistently highly esteemed his capacity to understand individuals. Self-restraint, he frequently told junior pilots, is the primary indication of somebody faking it. And however, the lady sitting behind him didn't vacillate, didn't squirm. She did nothing that fit into his account of individuals who didn't have a place. He moved awkwardly, the cowhide of his pilot seat squeaking underneath him. His contemplations spiraled. Who does she assume she is? Behaving like she possesses the spot. Reality. That Lena Carter possessed the spot in each sense was a reality Tyler wouldn't acknowledge. The more Maid Lena showed up, the more his emotion raged like individuals stirred up into a fire. Ethan, the youthful co-pilot, saw Tyler's developing tumult with provisional wariness. He made a sound as if to speak. Chief, is all that all right? You appear to be occupied. Tyler's glare snapped toward him. Eyes on your instruments. Ethan, don't fret about me yet, I said. Center. Tyler yelped, his voice slicing through the strain like an edge. Ethan fell quiet, shoulders straining as he turned around to the instruments. Tyler mumbled to himself, shaking his head. Kids nowadays no spine. Briefly quiet. Got back to the cockpit save for the musical signal up controls and the low murmur of the motors. Tyler's considerations rotted like toxic substance, obfuscating his brain as his disappointment stood back in the launch. Dana sat opposite Lena, her look waiting on her manager with a blend of interest and worry. Regardless of the pressure prior, Lena had fallen into a practically thoughtful quiet. She wasn't looking at her telephone, noting messages, or busying herself with work. She essentially stayed there, tranquil despite everything, her look fixed on the night sky past the window. Mrs. Carter, Dana at long last wandered, breaking the quiet. Lena turned her head marginally, her demeanor delicate however mindful. Yes. Dana delayed, then talked cautiously. I don't have the foggiest idea how you're so quiet after what occurred prior. I imply that Pilot Heath so transparently discourteous. Doesn't it annoy you? Lena's lips twisted into a weak grin like she had expected the topic. Obviously it irritates me, she answered delicately. However, individuals as him don't merit my energy. Not yet, Dana glared. In any case, why not currently? Lena's look floated to the window again, the weak gleam of the moon projecting a delicate light across her face. Her voice was low, nearly scrutinizing, on the grounds that power is a dance, Dana. In some cases the best move is to pause until your accomplice staggers. Men like him, they can't help themselves, their pride won't allow them to stop. Dana shifted her head, still unsure yet able to trust Lena's insight. You believe he will screw up much more? I realize he will, Lena said delicately. They generally do. The lodge subsided into quiet once again as Lena got back to her viewpoints. Yet in the cockpit, Tyler's brain beat with developing hatred. The tranquility of the launch camera feed disturbed him more than he wanted to concede. Ethan took a look at him and made some noise circumspectly. Sir, we're at cruising elevation. The frameworks are steady. I can screen in the event that you might want to enjoy some time off. Tyler's head snapped toward him, his face swooned into something between entertainment and disdain. A break? You think I really want a break? Ethan strained. I just implied simply keep your mouth shut and go about your business, Tyler snapped. Ethan murmured delicately and returned his concentration to the instruments. However, he couldn't resist the opportunity to look at the camera feed, his temples wrinkling as he watched Lena stay there, quiet, immaculate by the tempest Tyler was fermenting. Tyler couldn't endure anything else. He squeezed the lodge intricacy button, his voice level and cold as it rang out through the speakers. Mrs. Carter, Tyler's voice reverberated through the lodge. Assuming you require anything during the flight, go ahead and ask the participation. In any case, I'll keep the safety belt sign on until the end of the excursion for your well-being. The words were bound with something unquestionable haughtiness. Dana's mouth dropped somewhat in dismay. Did he just? Lena lifted one hand, halting her partner mid-sentence. She went after her glass of water, took a sluggish taste and put it down intentionally. Her demeanor didn't glimmer. Dana on the other hand couldn't contain her outrage. I can't completely accept that this he's difficult to cause it to appear as though we're being troublesome travelers. Lena's eyes stayed on the radio speaker, her lips squeezing into a little confused grin. He's laying out his own snare, she mumbled nearly to herself in the cockpit. Ethan couldn't conceal his distress. Commander, was that, as a matter of fact, vital? She wasn't requesting anything. Tyler gave him a shriveling look. Watch your tone, Ethan. Haven't arrived to question me. Ethan opened his mouth to contend, yet something in Tyler's sharp look made him stop. Rather, he drooped somewhat in his seat, eyes turning around to the gleaming instruments, yet a pit of disquiet settled somewhere down in his stomach. He couldn't shake the inclination that Tyler was driving excessively far back in the lodge. Lena shut her eyes momentarily, her face tranquil as though she were just resting, yet inside her contemplations were sharp, engaged and intentional. He's disentangling, she thought. Persistence was consistently her most noteworthy strength. Individuals like Tyler, driven by their pomposity and uncertainty, generally uncovered themselves in the end. Lena realized this. She had seen now as the ideal time, and once more, and at the point when they did, when they at last showed the world who they genuinely were, it could never be her hand that struck the last blow. They would fall completely all alone as the fly skimmed flawlessly as the night progressed. Lena collapsed, her hands in her lap, holding up watching equity she had learned was seldom clearly or prompted, hushed up, unwavering, and it generally showed up. Suddenly the personal luxury plane cruised during that time, sky quiet however for the low murmur of the motors and a periodic stir of the lodge group tending to little subtleties outside. The world was shrouded in an unending territory of obscurity, the stars flickering faintly, light taking a stand concerning something disentangling inside. The air felt heavier, however neither Lena nor Dana said a word about it. Lena sat still, her fingers following the smooth edge of her glass, missing mindedly to an untouchable. She showed up totally quiet, like a sovereign on her lofty position, yet underneath the outer layer of her quiet outside she could detect something moving, ATT pressure developing more tight, like an elastic band, extended as well far it wouldn't be long now in the cockpit. Chief Tyler Matthews fixed his grasp on the control yawl, his knuckles white as his dissatisfaction stood nearer to heating up. The lady behind him, Lena Carter, was the sum of everything on his mind. However, he couldn't exactly make sense of why there she was, situated in extravagance on a stream he guided, encompassed by solace and administration as though she were sovereignty, but she hadn't even done anything. She hadn't tested him, raised her voice, or given him cause for the developing hatred winding in his stomach, and that he understood sharply was the issue. Lena's quiet resembled a mirror held up to his face, reflecting back his frailties with each created breath she took, her refusal to respond, to recoil at his frivolous conduct, gesture at him like a splinter he was unable to eliminate. To Tyler she was deriding him while never letting out the slightest peep. His jaw ticked as he inclined nearer to the lodge camera feed. The screen shined faintly, showing Lena situated with a similar resolute tranquility, her associate Dana projecting apprehensive looks toward the cockpit entryway. Seeing them, they quiet, they calm, just stirred up Tyler's disturbance. They believe they're superior to me, he murmured to himself, voice low, also venomous. Ethan, the co-pilot, moved precariously in his seat. Sir Tyler snapped his head around, his demeanor sharp. Nothing, mind your work. Ethan squeezed his lips together and turned around to the instruments. He didn't, should be told 2 times, however where it counts. He couldn't shake the developing disquiet tripping at him. Tyler wasn't simply upset, he was fixated. It wasn't correct. Back in the lodge, Lena shifted her head somewhat as though paying attention to something no other person could hear, the weak snap of the berry, the quieted hints of development from the cockpit, the unobtrusive shift of air. Everything recounted her a story. Individuals frequently accepted that power was about control, about being the most intense voice in the room, yet Lena realized better. Obvious power was quiet formed. It was the capacity to hold your ground while others thrashed and battled against themselves, and at the present time Tyler Matthews was throwing away valuable time and energy. Dana's voice, destitute through Lena's viewpoints, delicate however touched with dissatisfaction. Mrs. Carter, I don't get it. For what reason is he acting this way? It's like he's attempting to incite you. Lena's look stayed fixed on the dull sky past the window. Since I haven't given him what he needs, Dana scowled. What do you mean? Lena went to confront her partner, her appearance consistent however smart. Certain individuals blossom with responses. Dana It's their approach to feeling in charge of master demonstrating something to themselves, assuming that I gave him my displeasure, my dissatisfaction, or even my affirmation of his conduct. I'd be giving him precisely the thing he's searching for. So you will do nothing?" Dana asked, doubtful. "Gracious, I will," Lena said delicately, a faint grin playing at the side of her lips. "However, not yet, not until he's gone as well." Dana gazed at her manager briefly, then at last shook her head in mistrust. "You're significantly more quiet than I'd at any point be." Lena laughed delicately, her voice low. "Furthermore, melodic persistence, my dear, is which isolates the individuals who win from the people who lose." The words waited in the air, calm yet strong in the cockpit. Tyler's disappointment arrived at its pinnacle. He could feel his control slipping, and it enraged him more than anything. Who was this lady to cause him to feel like this? Who was she to stay there so self-satisfied, so quiet, as though she were distant? He wouldn't let her success. "Ethan," Tyler said unexpectedly, his voice sharp. Ethan hopped somewhat. "Yes sir." "Switch the lodge speakers back to my channel," Tyler requested. Ethan faltered. "Sir, the flight is steady. There's no requirement for," I said. "Switch it," Tyler yelped, his voice cold. "Furthermore, persistent." Ethan gulped hard, his hands drifting over the controls. Hesitantly he consented, and with a weak click Tyler's voice would now help through the lodge speakers. Tyler took a breath, his lips twisting into an egotistical grin. "We should perceive how quiet she is presently," he mumbled softly, grasping the radio switch. He inclined toward the mic, his voice rang out through the lodge, erroneously affable yet trickling with haughtiness. "Lovely people," Tyler started. However, the main travelers were Lena and Dana. "This is your commander talking. We might want to remind all travelers to stay situated for the direct of the trip, as startling disturbance can be disrupting for everybody's security. We value your participation and understanding." The message was guiltless on a superficial level, yet Lena comprehended the aim. Tyler was attempting to startle her, to advise her that he was in charge of the stream, the flight, the sky. Dana's mouth fell open as the message finished. "Did he genuinely?" Lena breathed out, gradually putting her hands on the armrest as though establishing herself. She grinned faintly, her eyes limiting somewhat, and believed he's nearby. She mumbled delicately. Dana flickered near what to appearing his hand. Lena answered, her tone calm yet extremely sharp. "He thinks this is a game. He doesn't understand. He's as of now lost." Back in the cockpit, Tyler sat back in his seat, pompous fulfillment emanating off him like intensity. That ought to remind her who's in control. He expressed more to himself than to Ethan's hands jerked on the controls, his voice tight. "Skipper, I truly don't feel that declaration was essential. It's amateurish and enough." "Ethan," Tyler snapped, his voice unforgiving, "I needn't bother with the address from you." Ethan fell quiet again. However, a pit of disquiet sat vigorously in his chest. Something planned to turn out badly. He could feel that Tyler's way of behaving was spiraling, and there would be ramifications. Tyler anyway didn't see it that way. He reclined in his seat, his self-importance casing him like a safeguard. He had come to his meaningful conclusion, or so he thought. In the lodge, Lena inclined back toward her seat, her stance loose, yet her eyes held a flash of sharp lucidity. Tyler had exceeded his inner self, had pushed him excessively far. "Hune's done," Lena said delicately, more to herself than to Dana. Gazed at her wide, looked at. "What do you mean?" Lena's grin returned cool and unflinching. "You'll see soon. Sufficient." The personal luxury plane sliced through the mists like a sharp edge, quiet and quick. For the present the lodge stayed a shelter of quiet, yet the tempest, tranquil and patient, was gathering strength, and when it hit Tyler Matthews wouldn't realize what had struck him. The personal luxury plane floated during that time sky like a quiet hunter, shrouded in murkiness and mystery, yet inside its clean limits pressure undulated through the air like imperceptible strings prepared to snap. In the cockpit, Chief Tyler Matthews sat unbending, his hands locked on the control burden. Despite the fact that the autopilot held consistent, the delicate shine of the instrument board glimmered against his face, the murmur of the motors filling the quiet among him and his co-pilot. Ethan Tyler's egotistical sad fulfillment waited like cold smoke after his last unimportant declaration to him. The message was a last statement of his control, his situation as the one in control. However, where it counts, he felt it, and disquiet troubling the edges of his viewpoints. "She's too quiet," he murmured softly, his voice scarcely discernible. Ethan investigated warily, his voice cautious. "Sir, what did you say?" Tyler's eyes flicked toward him, sharp also unrelenting. "Nothing." "Check the height again." Ethan turned around to his instruments, his developments firm and exact. The disquiet he felt had just developed since departure. Tyler was disentangling. "Furthermore, There was no mixing up it. His obsession with the traveler Mrs. Carter had crossed a line. Ethan had heard stories about pilots like Tyler, men whose uncertainties rotted over long periods of uncontrolled haughtiness. They assumed they were powerful in the cockpit, their titles protecting them from a responsibility. However, watching Tyler now, Ethan realized the safeguard was breaking, and when it broke it would break totally. In the lodge, Lena sat with her typical immovable balance, her look fixed through the window. The evening glow moved across the mists underneath, projecting pale gleaming shadows that appeared to extend everlastingly. Next to her, Dana sat with her arms crossed, the pressure in her little edge clear as she squirmed with the sew of her skirt. Her dissatisfaction was noticeable. However, Lena's tranquility, her capacity to remain firm, just extended Dana's disarray. "I actually don't get it," Dana mumbled, her voice scarcely over a murmur. "How might you simply stay there? Hugh's essentially taunting you." Lena turned her head, her appearance delicate however intentional. Her voice conveyed no outrage, just peaceful assurance. "Since his defeat is as of now moving Dana, he simply doesn't have any acquaintance with it yet." Dana squinted, her forehead wrinkling. "What do you mean?" Lena offered a little puzzling grin. "Individuals like him generally uncover themselves. The more you let them act unrestrained, the more they show the world who they truly are. He's on foundation of uncertainty." Dana breathed out pointedly, her dissatisfaction scarcely kept back. "I actually don't have the foggiest idea about why we need to pause for it to happen." Lena went after her glass of shimmering water, her fingers brushing the gem stem with rehearsed elegance. She lifted it to her lips, taking a slow taste prior to bringing down it cautiously. "On the grounds that persistence, my dear, is what compels the example stick." The words lingered, palpably cool and unflinching, as though they were scratched in stone. Back in the cockpit, Tyler's contemplations stirred like tempest mists, dim and consuming. Lena's name, Mrs. Carter, had started to grind on him. Each time Ethan or the lodge team referenced it, wasn't simply her presence that agitated him, it was her quietness in his psyche. Lena ought to have responded at this point. She ought to have whined, dissented, or requested deals with serious consequences regarding his discourtesy. Rather, she stayed there in complete quiet, unbothered by his frivolous endeavors to shake her, and that incensed him. Tyler's fingers fixed around the burden as he reclined in his seat. The lodge camera feed shined on the screen before him, showing Lena situated with calm beauty, her hands collapsed delicately in her lap. "What's her game?" Tyler murmured, his voice scarcely perceptible. Ethan, hearing him, turned marginally. "Chief, I truly figure you ought to quiet down. You're allowing this to happen to you." Tyler chanced him a glare, his voice cruel and cut. "I'm fine." Ethan sent her around the damn instruments. Ethan squeezed his lips into a slim line, yet he didn't contend. The pressure in the cockpit felt suffocating, and Tyler's spiraling way of behaving resembled a tempest cloud, becoming heavier by the minute. Then, as though constrained by his own dissatisfaction, Tyler pursued a choice. "I'm going to step back there," he said abruptly, propelling himself out of his seat. Ethan's head whipped around, his eyes wide. "Sir, you might at any point can, and I will." Tyler snapped, his tone last. "You think I will allow a traveler to stay there and carry on like she possesses this stream?" Ethan attempted once more, his voice arguing. "Commander, this is certainly not a smart thought. In the event that something happens, nothing will happen," Tyler snarled, fixing his uniform coat watch the controls before Ethan could fight further. Tyler opened the cockpit entryway furthermore, ventured into the lodge. The calm murmur of the motors filled the lodge as Tyler's strides reverberated down the thin walkway. Lena saw him right away, however she didn't turn her head. She remained precisely as she was, quiet, ready, also holding up Dana. Then again solidified as she saw the chief stepping toward them, his articulation dull and hard. "Good gracious," she mumbled faintly. Tyler halted a couple of feet from Lena's seat, his presence creating a shaded area over the delicate shine of the lodge. Briefly he said nothing, remaining there like trusting that Lena will recognize him. Yet Lena didn't. She took as much time as is needed, lifting her look to meet his with a calm force that appeared to strip away his swagger layer by layer. There was no outrage in her eyes, no apprehension, just a steady quiet that frightened him far beyond what yelling at any point could. "Is there something I can assist you with, Chief?" Lena asked delicately, her voice estimated, and even Tyler shuddered at her tone. "I thought I'd register to check whether everything was good," he said. However, the wrongness of his words was difficult to miss. Lena's look didn't falter. "Everything is very acceptable." Much thanks to you. Her tranquility resembled a blade. Tyler could feel it cutting into him, uncovering the slight facade of his control. He opened his mouth to talk once more, however Lena's next words halted him cold. Except if obviously there's something you really want to say, Skipper Matthews. Her voice was light, practically inquisitive, yet the heaviness of her words hit like a mallet. Without sitting tight for a reaction, he pivoted suddenly and strode back toward the cockpit, his strides harder and stronger than before as the cockpit entryway clicked shut behind him. Dana let out an insecure breath. What was that? Lena grinned faintly, turning her look back toward the window, the tempest breaking. Dana squinted, obviously befuddled, yet he didn't actually say anything. That is the point, Lena mumbled delicately. He showed his shortcoming without acknowledging it. Outside, the mist separated to uncover the weak shine of city lights underneath. The finish of the excursion was close in any case. Lena knew the genuine completion, the retribution, was simply starting. Commander Tyler Matthews had at long last crossed a line, and what came next would change all that. The lodge fell quiet after Tyler Matthews withdrew to the cockpit, yet the strain waited like the later WTH of a lightning strike. It wasn't clearly or dangerous. No yelling, no scenes, except for its heaviness was discernible, lingering palpably like an undetectable string extended to its limit. Lena's look stayed on the window, the weak shine of city lights beneath gleaming through the mists. Her appearance gazed back at her, a lady quiet and ready, yet with eyes that conveyed an implicit sharpness, the sort of sharpness one acquired exclusively through long periods of calm fights and triumphs no other person saw close to her. Dana sat frozen, as yet attempting to handle what had simply happened. She let out a shallow breath, shaking her head as though the movement could dissipate her incredulity. What was that? Dana at last murmured, her voice quieted like she could wake a resting monster. Lena didn't quickly reply, rather she went after her glass of shimmering water, lifting it with a similar intentional consideration. She continuously showed the glass sparkled faintly in her grasp as she took a taste and put it down with accuracy that Lena said delicately was a man wavering on the edge of his own annihilation. Dana squinted, her temple wrinkled, however he did nothing competently, just normal. Ethan the co-pilot winced at the unexpected explosion. Skipper, what's happening? Tyler gave him a glare, his voice sharp and gnawing. Don't pose inquiries, you needn't bother with replies to. Ethan gazed at him briefly prior to turning away, his hands steadying themselves on the control board. The air in the cockpit felt weighty, choking indeed. Even as though Tyler's rage was saturating each edge of the little space. Tyler hung forward, scouring a hand over his face as he murmured to himself, believes she's distant, doesn't she? Staying there disapproving of at me as I don't exist. Ethan gambled with a look at Chief, his disquiet developing. Sir, I truly don't believe she's doing anything, she's simply staying there. Tyler's head gobbled up, his glare slicing through Ethan like an edge. That is the issue, don't you get? It's kin like her, they stroll into spaces they don't have a place, carry on like they own it, and nobody says a word. Ethan faltered, his voice cautious. With all due regard, Chief, this isn't about her, you're allowing it to get individual. Tyler's clenched hand rammed against the armrest of his seat. It is private, this is my plane, I'm the one in charge here, not her damn cash, and unquestionably not her disposition. Ethan sat back, staggered into quiet. He had never seen Tyler like this before. The man was unwinding his typical self-importance, giving way to something hazy or something risky. Skipper, Ethan said discreetly. We're 4 or 5 close to landing. For what reason don't we just? I know precisely exact thing I'm doing. Tyler snapped, removing him. He didn't view at Ethan as he turned his consideration back to the controls, his developments jerky. Also, too strong, you center around your work and I'll zero in on mine. Ethan gulped hard, his stomach letting him know something was extremely off base. The flight had been smooth routine on a superficial level, however Lena realized the tempest was building. Tyler's self-image had presented to him this far, and it would be his self-image that pulled him past the brink. Dana, detecting the shift, inclined closer. Mrs. Carter, do you believe he's alright? He looked. I don't have the foggiest idea. Unhinged. Lena's demeanor resisted the urge to panic, however her voice conveyed a note of calm resolve. He's terrible control, Dana, and when men like him let completely go, they make botches. Dana scowled, her voice dropping lower. However, we're still in the air. Imagine a scenario where he accomplishes something crazy. Lena's look mellowed somewhat as she checked out at her associate. That is the reason we continuously plan for each chance. Trust me. Dana needed to press for more. Needed to ask what Lena implied, however something in Lena's tone quieted her. There was a sureness there, a peaceful strength that consoled her even as the disquiet waited. Tyler's hand shook as he gazed at the instruments before him. He didn't see the manner in which Ethan was watching him, nor did he care. All he could contemplate was Lena Carter staying there with that rankling quiet, that unflinching certainty. It made him feel little immaterial, and Tyler Matthews had consumed his entire time on Earth battling against that feeling. "I'll show her," he mumbled to himself, his voice low and venomous. "I'll show her who's." As a matter of fact, in control, his hand moved to the radio switch again, his knuckles white as he grasped it firmly. He didn't know precisely exact thing he needed to say, however the need to apply ability to make Lena see him was overpowering. Ethan saw the development and sat upright, his voice sharp with concern. "Chief, what are you doing?" Tyler didn't answer. His finger drifted over the switch as his breathing stimulated. "Skipper," Ethan attempted once more, his voice stronger this time. "Stop, you're getting a line." The word sliced through Tyler like a whip, and briefly he froze. Ethan's words reverberated to him, sharp and evident. "You're crossing a line," he flickered, the resentment faltering as reality pawed at the edges of his viewpoints. His hand shuddered, and afterward a delicate ring reverberated through the cockpit. Tyler recoiled at the sound, his eyes snapping to the control board. Ethan inclined nearer, disarray and concern moving quickly over his face. "What that, Ethan?" asked. Tyler's heart sank as he read the message squinting on the screen, a solitary dire notice from the plane's inner correspondence framework. "Approaching message from proprietor's office, need level prompt." Tyler's face withered. Ethan took a gander at him, his voice low and careful. "What does it say, sir?" Tyler couldn't answer. His mouth went dry as he gazed at the screen, the blazing text like a commencement to his death. The message was from David Carter, Lena's better half, and at that time Tyler knew his time was up. The sparkle of the cockpit's instrument board glinted faintly against Tyler Matthews' pale, perspiration-slicked face. The message on the screen, "Approaching message from proprietor's office, need level quick," appeared to consume into his retinas as though each word conveyed the heaviness of his unwinding profession. His hand shuddered against the control burden as his psyche hustled, looking for replies, for a method for recapturing control. Tyler had gone through years roosted on the weak edge of his pride, trusting himself distant. Now in the faint light of the cockpit, reality had at long last up to speed. To him the name David Carter frowned at him like a capital punishment. Ethan, the youthful co-pilot, inclined nearer, his forehead wrinkled. "Sir, what happening does the message say?" Tyler didn't answer, his lips separated like to express, however no words came. Maybe his body had quit working, incapacitated by the heaviness of his own pomposity at last falling around him. "Commander," Ethan squeezed again, his voice touched with earnestness. With a jerk, Tyler slapped a hand over the radio button, quieting any further inquiries center around the controls. "Ethan," he snarled, however his voice faltered, double-crossing his dread. Ethan gazed at him in dismay. "Chief, I don't have any idea this is from the I said center," Tyler snapped, his voice sharp and wild-eyed. However the harm was done. Tyler's cover of poise had laid bare, and Ethan saw it for what it was, franticness in the lodge. The murmur of the motors was the main sound as Lena sat, her face tranquil as ever, her eyes still fixed on the tremendous night sky past the window, as though on cue. The lodge radio popped to life, the static sharp against the weighty comm. Lena shifted her head marginally, one temple angling as she trusted that Tyler will talk, yet no voice came, just quietness. Dana looked toward the cockpit entryway, her face tight with disarray. "Is something off base? For what reason isn't he saying anything?" Lena grinned faintly, her voice a mumble. "Since he doesn't have the foggiest idea what to say, the message has reached him." Tyler's heart roared in his chest as he gazed at the cockpit screen. He understood what the message implied. There was no stowing away from it. David Carter wasn't the sort of man to allow things to slide, not when his organization's guidelines were in question. Tyler had gone too far, and presently the results were pursuing him down like a tempest he was unable to get away from. He bungled at the controls, attempting to recapture the slightest bit of center. His brain dashed. "Perhaps I can streamline this, perhaps it's simply an admonition, perhaps." Yet even as the reason stacked up to him, Tyler knew reality. Men like David Carter didn't send quick messages without cause. He looked at the screen one final time. Another line of message seemed expect direct correspondence after a landing plan for reassignment survey. Tyler's face went white. Reassignment, it was corporate language, cold cold and clinical, yet he knew precisely very thing it implied, and his vocation was completed. Ethan saw Tyler's shaking hands. "Commander, you're not alright, let me handle." "Shut up," Tyler murmured, his voice breaking as his control slipped further. "I needn't bother with your assistance." The more youthful man reclined paralyzed into quiet, his eyes wide as he watched his skipper, once a figure of certainty, disintegrate before him. The radio popped again, this time more honed as Tyler endeavored to consistent his breathing. His voice at last separated through, however it was lopsided. "What's more, stressed Mrs. Carter," he started, his standard self-importance diminished to an insecure endeavor at control, "we will land presently if it's not too much trouble. Guarantee your safety belt is attached." The words failed empty. It was a little pathetic endeavor to keep up with power, and Lena remembered it for what it was, a man getting a handle on at the last dangerous of his disintegrating pride. From her seat Lena grinned a quiet, estimated grin that no other person could see. She reclined, resting her hands delicately on the armrests, like subsiding into her privileged position. "Skipper," she answered flawlessly, her voice conveying a weight Tyler couldn't match. Dana flickered, seeing Lena in stunningness. "You're so quiet, I'd lose it right now." Lena turned her head somewhat, the grin still present. "Why lose your poise when you've won?" Tyler's breathing developed quicker, stronger. "Smooth landing, I'll land this impeccably. Perhaps they'll re-examine." "Perhaps." Ethan, incapable to remain quiet, mumbled faintly. "Skipper, simply send her around the gig." However, Tyler wasn't listening. His contemplations orbited one thing, one individual, Lena Carter, the one who had said nothing, done nothing, yet still destroyed him piece by piece while never lifting a finger. Inside the lodge, Lena detached her safety belt with intentional consideration, her developments as smooth as could be expected. Dana breathed out with help. "We're here." Lena grinned faintly, however said nothing. She realized the genuine second was on the way at the cockpit. Tyler sat frozen, looking directly ahead as though he was unable to bear to move. His headset hummed faintly with a message from the Pinnacle. "Welcome to New York. Mr. Carter's staff is in transit to the plane. Get ready for interview." Tyler's stomach dropped. External smooth dark SUVs pulled up to the fly, their headlights sharp and resolute. Men in suits ventured out, their developments conscious. As they moved toward the steps, Tyler watched through the cockpit window, his breathing shallow as the truth of what looked for him hit like a clench hand to the stomach. "Skipper," Ethan said discreetly. Tyler didn't answer in light of the fact that in that second he knew reality he had at last met. As far as it goes, the murmur of the motors had stilled, leaving the private stream frightfully quiet. External, the cadenced crash of strides on the landing area repeated faintly into the lodge as dark SUVs arranged perfectly in line. The delicate shine of the lodge lights enlightened Lena Carter's face, formed and rich as she sat unmoving, watching situation transpire with a calm knowing eye close to her. Dana held her tablet firmly, her look shooting to the windows. Through the glass she could see forcefully dressed men leaving the vehicle's leader's partner and security detail. It was clear they weren't here for merriments. "Are those David's kin?" Dana murmured, the disquiet obvious in her voice. Lena gave the littlest gesture, her appearance quiet. "Yes." Dana gulped, taking one more look toward the cockpit entryway. "You will lose it, you realize that, right?" Lena's lips twisted into a weak grin. "He as of now has." In the cockpit, Tyler Matthews sat frozen in his seat, his brain a haze of fear and mistrust. The headlights of the oncoming SUVs illuminated the obscured landing area outside, the shafts slicing through the weak fog hanging in the night air. Each step taken by the men in suits felt like a drumbeat developing stronger in his mind. "Chief, they're here," Ethan said discreetly. Kiel from his seat, his tone low and careful. Tyler didn't answer. His face was pale, his hands actually locked on the burden. Despite the fact that the motors had been closed down, maybe giving up of the controls would finish what he definitely realized his vocation was over. "They will need to converse with you," Ethan squeezed tenderly. "You want to? Don't let me know what I want to do." Tyler yapped, his voice breaking as he turned strongly toward Ethan. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breathing whimsical. "You figure I don't have the foggiest idea what's going on with that lady? She arranged this. She's been teasing me from the second she stepped on this plane." Ethan grimaced, skepticism moving quickly over his face. "Sir, you did this to yourself. She didn't let out the slightest peep to you, and you shut up." Tyler spat, his hand throwing down on the armrest. "She is simply some rich—" He halted himself, the word hanging implicit toxin reviling on his tongue. His head dropped, eyes flicking to the ground as he breathed out forcefully. The sharp thump on the cockpit entryway took the two men leap. Ethan turned around the entryway like it could burst open. "Sir, they're here." Tyler didn't move. Briefly the two men sat peacefully, the thump sounding again, stronger this time, more persistent. At last Tyler stood. The developments were firm, as though his body reopposed each step. He fixed his rumpled coat and smoothed a hand through his soggy hair, constraining himself to inhale. "They won't fire me," he murmured softly, as though attempting to persuade himself. "I've been hair too lengthy. They need me." Ethan didn't contend. He essentially looked as Tyler opened the cockpit entryway and pushed it open. When Tyler ventured into the lodge, Lena was at that point standing, her stance impeccably ready, as though the whole trial had been only a minor bother. Her look cleared over him as he moved toward his developments, vacillating somewhat under her calm. "Investigation, Mrs. Carter," Tyler said, compelling a tight grin that looked more like a grimace. "We've landed securely. I trust everything was agreeable to you." Lena's forehead angled somewhat at the endeavor at mutual respect, her demeanor staying cool and unbothered. She didn't answer promptly. All things considered, she looked toward the lodge entryway, where shadows flashed against the off-white glass as David Carter's group drew near. "I'll allow my significant other to conclude," Lena said delicately. The words "basic and estimated" hit Tyler like a punch to the stomach. Any transitory expectation he'd had broken into pieces. The lodge entryway opened and in ventured David Carter. David Carter was a man whose presence could quietness a room before he talked. Tall, expansive bore. What's more, wearing an impeccably customized charcoal suit, he moved with the certainty of somebody who won't ever need to speak more loudly to deserve admiration. The ones who followed him, security help. Furthermore, senior leaders stood by quietly, their appearances incoherent yet sharp. "Lena," David said first, his voice warm as he strode toward his better half. He kissed her cheek tenderly prior to venturing back, his dull look glimmering toward Tyler's throat. When dry, David checked out him with a sort of calm power that caused Tyler to feel like he was being taken apart on the spot. He didn't have to speak loudly. The power was in his quietness and the manner in which his look held Tyler. "Set up, Chief Matthews," David said finally, his tone quiet however purposeful. "Would you want to make sense of your conduct on this flight?" Tyler flickered, his mouth opening furthermore, shutting pointlessly. "Briefly, sir, I don't have any idea everything you've been said yet. There's been a misconception." David's temple lifted somewhat. "A misconception?" "Yes," Tyler said rapidly, a glimmer of distress in his voice. "All in all, nothing remains to be made sense of. The flight was smooth and there were no bad things to say. I've done nothing out of sorts." Lena's delicate voice sliced through the room like a razor. "Nothing out of sorts." Tyler turned forcefully toward her, his demeanor winding as he battled to hold his disintegrating poise. "Mrs. Carter, with all due regard." "No," David contributed briskly, his look limiting. "You won't address my better half." Tyler froze, the words hitting him like a slap. David made a stride nearer, his voice quiet however tenacious. "My group has proactively gotten a full report, Chief Observer. Explanations from the team, lodge sound records. Your conduct on this flight was amateurish, inadmissible, and honestly humiliating." Tyler's face became red as his head shook in dismay. "You can't. You're done," David said, his tone last. "You will at this point not fly for this organization or any auxiliary under my name. I recommend you pack your things and leave this airplane quickly. My group will guarantee you are accompanied from the premises." The quiet in the lodge was outright. Tyler gazed at David, then at Lena, like looking for some last opportunity to argue his case, yet there was nothing. Lena stood quiet despite everything, her look holding him like a mirror to his own disgrace. Briefly Tyler's chest hurled as though he could yell or dissent. In any case, the words never came. He took a gander at the countenances around him. Dana, David's group, Ethan actually waiting at the cockpit entryway, and acknowledged there was nobody left to protect him. He had done this to himself. Tyler advanced toward the lodge entryway, his means weighty and slow, like his body opposed each movement. Two colleagues, him without a word, directing him down the steps and onto the landing area where the dark SUVs held up from the window. Dana looked as Tyler vanished into the dim. She let out a breath. She hadn't understood she'd been holding it over. Lena got her jacket from her seat, hanging it carefully over her arm. "It's been over starting from the starting." David went to his significant other with a little grin, his demeanor mellowing. "Will we go?" Lena gestured, slipping her hand delicately into his offered arm. Together they left the stream, leaving the memory of Tyler Matthews and his destruction far, behind, and very much appreciate that the one who thought he held all the power took in the hardest illustration of his life. Never misjudge the tranquil ones in light of the fact that their quietness frequently holds the most intense results. If you partook in this story and need to hear more stories of equity, karma, and unforeseen turns, remember to like, offer, and in particular buy into the feed. Hit that warning ringer so you never miss a story. Gratitude for watching, and I'll see you in the following one.